Hello, everybody. I am Greg Finn, a contributor here at Search Engine Land and host of Marketing O'Clock. And I am with the fabulous Menachem Ani from the JXT group, who you just saw the presentation of. And we've got a lot of questions for you here. We've got a lightning round for you, Menachem. Thank you so much for that presentation. And we're going to get right to it here. I know you had a lot of information about some of the automated bidding and saying some of the budgets, you don't want to have too small of a budget. And there were some questions out there that came in that said, is the 5X budget on CPA based on the daily budget that you had mentioned? From Jeff Tyson.
Yeah, so first off, thanks again for joining us here today. Super excited to be here. Regarding the CPA recommendation, that's actually a recommendation from Google, and we find in our experience it's pretty much on target. You do want it to be about 5 times your daily CPA target.
And so what happens if you go too low and you try to make it work too hard? What would you see in your account?
Yeah, definitely. So the issue that you'll run into there is by not giving it enough room to breathe, you're kind of throttling the amount of data that can flow through it, and smart bidding won't really have enough leeway to find the right consumers and get you the amount of conversions that you're hoping for. And so that's really where that recommendation comes from, is to give it enough of a chance to get the performance you want to see.
Okay, great. Another thing that I thought was a great question from Melissa Mackey, she says, have you found that using target impression share on brand terms pushes the bids in CPCs way up?
So for the most part, in our experience, we find that target impression share is a good way to ensure that you show up the whole time. As opposed to like when you go for maximized conversions or target CPA, the system will try to spend the full budget. And in that scenario, we see that it ends up spending more than target impression, where once it hits its goal of 80, 90, 100% impression share, it stops serving. And so we find that it actually performs better in that way. At the same time, though, if you do see it driving your costs up, you might want to just go back to like more manual bids or maximize clicks with some kind of threshold in place. But typically we find that it performs best without really running into that issue as much as you would think.
All right, another question from Michael Gumbert here. He says, is there an automated bidding strategy that you like more than the others when you have a limited or small budget?
So that's a good question, because small budgets are always tricky. And so I guess it's really what you can control a bit more, because when the budget is smaller, the system is not able to run as many tests as it would need to. And so whatever you can control a bit more, in that case, like it's, you might want to lean more on something like maximize conversions and just try to give it a target CPA or, a specific target. But smaller budgets typically are hard. And a lot of times you might need to default back to like more manual bids just to force the system to get a lot of traffic out of it.
All right. Another good question about switching some of the bid types comes from Rebecca Logan. She says, do you recommend the strategy when starting over as well? For example, would you realize your conversion tracking isn't properly implemented? Should you reset everything to maximize clicks or manual CPC after you fix those issues? And it seems like whenever you're starting, you had mentioned you prefer manual CPC or maximize clicks. Would you do it if you're kind of just trying to reset a campaign from the start?
That's definitely an interesting approach that does happen often. You take over campaigns or you're redoing your conversion tracking. I think in that scenario, it would really be based on the overall performance of the campaigns. Typically, when coming into an existing account, you want to try not to make too many drastic changes in one shot and sort of shock the system. So if the campaigns are driving the end result that you're hoping for, whether it's sales or leads, I would probably be less likely to reset and just sort of tweak the system and make smaller changes. But if it's not performing well at all and it's really far off from your goals, in that case, I probably would jump back to a more manual process just to try to have more control until the system has enough data to really do its job well.
Okay, so something maybe like a major conversion change would warrant the kind of reset, and if it's more incremental, I think you said 5 to 10% or so.
Yeah. Yeah, so again, if you're making like a drastic change in what it's tracking, and so the previous data that it has is not really useful for the system, in that case, you might want to go back and drive more manual traffic. But again, if the campaigns are performing to some extent, and it's got, even if the data actions that it's tracking are slightly different, but it has some data to know what a conversion is, you can likely still work with what you have and just maybe tweak the guidance of it. So if you're changing the value of conversion actions or things of that nature, instead of resetting to manual bids and kind of forcing it back into this learning stage, you can adjust your target KPIs and just push it along in smart bidding.
Okay. And then you had said that many times you like starting with either manual CPC or maximize clicks. How do you determine which one you choose? Like, what's your thought process and when to use one over the other?
Yeah, so I mean, at the end of the day, they're very similar. Maximize clicks really is just going to try to get as many clicks as it can within your budget. Typically, I think that the deciding factor for me might be just the overall budget. For really, really small campaigns, I'll probably do more manual bids where I can like have that granular level of control over it. Whereas if a campaign has a large enough budget, it's more about just sending traffic through, letting the system learn. So I don't need to have as much control on it myself. So I think that's really the way that I would approach it in deciding which one to choose.
Okay, let's hop back to target impression share. And this question comes from Sean Davidson. He says, for campaigns for your own brand, what success have you seen with target impression share bidding? Are you able to effectively prevent your competitors from showing above you using this strategy? It's important for us to show above our competition, not just being present for the search.
Yeah, definitely. So within target impression share bidding, there is an option to select just target impression share or target absolute top of page. And so in that scenario, you'd want to make sure that you just select that you want to show up 100% of the time, absolute top of the page, and it should help achieve what you're aiming for.
Yeah, and it's just a little radio button, and then if you click it, you can turn
Correct.
that right on. Okay, another question from Rebecca Logan here. Customer match, only if you've spent 50K lifetime, correct?
Yes. And so it definitely takes a bit of time to get there for smaller accounts. For larger accounts, you'll get there faster, but it is super useful.
Okay, and I believe they are trying to make that more accessible. So just for the record there. All right, so next up from Michael Gumbert. This is, I guess, maybe more of a deeper question, but Michael says, do we always want to share our first-party data points with Google? What is the cost-benefit analysis for when we do, but more importantly, when we shouldn't?
So, I mean, ultimately, as I mentioned in the presentation, the machines and the algorithms, can only work as well as the input we provide. So from that perspective, you really want to give as much data as you can. The more Google's algorithm understands your full sales cycle, the better job it can do of targeting your potential customers. At the same time, I know, it can be concerning to provide all your data to sort of this black box where smart bidding is taking place. And there's definitely a lot of different thoughts you have around that, but ultimately, the more data the system has, the better job it can do in targeting your customers. So there definitely is going to be a trade-off in there somewhere.
Okay, and another question here from Joseph Bidner. For offline conversion imports, do you prefer Gclid tracking or the new enhanced conversion method?
Sure. So enhanced conversions is less of offline conversion imports. Enhanced conversion gives Google a bit of extra data from like the online confirmation page. A user fills out a form or submits an order online. Within the tracking pixel, you're able to configure it so it's able to collect more first-party data directly from the page. Offline conversion tracking is typically when you're importing data from your CRM whether it's Salesforce, HubSpot, or a smaller CRM like Pipedrive, where you have a business that is getting leads from Google Ads and the sales process happens offline and you're bringing that back in. So typically that's going to happen through the GCLID, the Google Click ID. And, I think that ultimately you'd like to have both of those in place.
Okay, great. Question from Jessica Rizzo here. For industries that cannot use customer lists, what alternatives are there to provide Google with value data?
So we've definitely seen that a lot in medical and legal industries specifically. I think that it's something that you just got to navigate around. It's a reality, due to the privacy requirements. Typically, what we fall back to are things like custom intent audiences, just building audiences around like somebody who is in line to be your customer, but not necessarily your customer. Just basically back it up one step to be as close as you can get while still following the guidelines and best practices.
Okay, this has already been a lightning round, but we are going to fly through everything else here. So, question from Paul: how is your personal experience with smart bidding and Broadmatch?
So initially when smart bidding came out, or I've been very hesitant years ago, but as the system has really improved, we've come to be very reliant on it. We typically use smart bidding in most scenarios unless there's a reason to not use it. In the combination with smart bidding and Broadmatch, it can definitely be a bit tricky. For e-commerce, I think you'll have much better results because the tracking pixel is able to see in real time what's turning into actual revenue. So if something's not converting, it'll quickly stop serving. And so I'm much more open to doing Broadmatch with e-commerce. For lead generation campaigns where the system is only tracking whether or not it generated a lead, it's very hard to rely on that because the system will generate a lead thinking that it found a good quality lead, but at the end of the day, it's somebody you can't sell to. So unless you have that offline conversion import in place that tells the system and closes that feedback loop, it's a little bit trickier, and I would test carefully.
Great. And there's going to be more information on that on the upcoming presentation about automation layering. So specifically to that question, so don't miss that one. All right, now we're doing a PMax corner here. All right, you ready? So haven't tested Performance Max just yet. Does Google say that it will take away from the search campaigns in your account, or is that something you just found through testing from Christopher?
So Google does say that Performance Max takes precedence over pretty much all other campaign types. The only scenario in where it doesn't is exact match terms, and even that there's very specifics that Google has published. But typically it will pull away traffic from every other campaign type as it takes precedence in the auction.
Especially shopping. Be careful.
Especially
But
shopping.
So exact match, they say it's if it's identically matched.
Exactly. So not even a standard exact match, one level deeper.
Yep, and which isn't even a real match type. All right, another question from Joe Bidner here. Would love to hear about structure and segmentation strategies for PMax. There's a lot of talk about how hyper segmentation, where you add one audience signal per asset group, is simply done because of how the Insights tab feeds us back our data at the asset group level. How are you structuring PMax?
So typically, most of the PMax that we're doing is centered around e-commerce campaigns. And so typically we try to structure it in a similar way that you would a normal shopping campaign, which is based on business categories. For some e-commerce retailers, it could be a category, a brand, a product type. Typically, we're finding that asset groups work well to line up the creative and copy to the products that are underneath it. For lead gen, you would do something similar. We've been testing in a small way, running asset groups around audience signals. The only real good thing to come from that are those insights that you mentioned, but ultimately you can't see performance based on an asset group level. So it's a little like counterproductive. And at the same time, the audience signal is just a signal. It's not really audience targeting. So you don't know, who's being targeted underneath it. Because it's such a black box, I feel like you're better off using the asset group in the way it was intended to line up the copy, the creative with the product or service underneath it. And if we do want to test different audience signals, you might look at breaking it out into a separate campaign so you could see performance separately. But I'm a big fan of keeping things simple and not creating too much complexity in your campaign structure.
All right, keeping it here in the corner, the PMAX corner. Question from Colby McIntyre. With Performance Max, can you only utilize one conversion goal for the entire campaign, specifically with the video aspect? We have different business goals for those than we do for our shopping or remarketing.
So you could set conversion goals on the campaign level. I think by default it'll go to whatever you have in your account, but you definitely could select different conversion actions that you want to focus on within each campaign.
All right. Another question, a question from Stacy Goodchild here. She says, what do you do if you want to run shopping, but you don't have a video and don't want one with Performance Max?
That's the tricky question. At the end of the day, Google will generate one of those automated videos that don't look too great. I've heard that they've got some better themes and templates in the pipeline. They're also rolling out a video creator in the account. So it just kind of comes with it. If you want to run Performance Max, it's just something that is part of it.
All right, and that has concluded the PMAX corner, but we have many more questions here. And before we do, just a note from Tammy Boyle. She says, I get what you're saying about the G-Clid. However, with the latest iOS updates, many are appearing as G-Braid and W-Braid. So just a little note there. And then a question, again, about kind of changing up some of those smart bidding strategies from Alex Lowe. They write, how would you handle introducing a new landing page? Let's say we are about 6 and 10 in terms of how happy we are with the target CPA results. Would you revert back to maximize clicks if you update the landing page?
Chances are, if I'm introducing a new landing page and everything else in the campaign, keywords, copy, all that stuff is going to stay the same, I probably would not revert back to manual. Just maybe introduce the landing page either as one of several ads or as an experiment, and let the data guide you. Start off slow, make sure it's converting in a similar way, and then roll out from there.
Okay, we need to answer this one quickly. There's actually going to be another answer in the automation layering for this, Thomas. If you want to stick around, it's at 3 o'clock, around 3 o'clock, a little bit before. He writes, you mentioned the importance of providing the algorithm with enough information to be able to know the difference between good and bad leads. Do you find that importing CRM data is enough, or do you also recommend adding conversion values?
So if you have conversion values, that's really the ideal goal, is to provide real revenue back into the system so it knows what's what. But if you don't have revenue coming back, I would recommend even creating a proxy, like what this lead is worth versus what that lead's worth. But if you don't have any of that, at least you should be sending over like converted lead data, so like which leads are turning into real closed deals, and the system can do something with that.
Okay, and we're going to finish it up here with workshopping what we would do for this client. And it's Nathan Von Fumity. He says, how would I use value-based bidding for a webinar? Right now I'm using Target CPA and it works well. I know the value to assign to purchase. I'm not sure the value I would assign to somebody who opts into the webinar. So if you got a webinar, is Target CPA okay? Do you need values? What do you do?
So I guess it depends what the last level of conversion is. Is just registering for the webinar enough? Is there, typically with lead gen campaigns, if somebody signs up, that's one level of a conversion. But if you are providing a service, let's say, that has to go through a sales process, so you want to know what leads converted into a sale. It sounds like, with a webinar, and I don't have too much experience around that once they've submitted that form, they've converted. At that stage, I would probably stick with Target CPA, because you know what you want to pay for each attendee on the webinar. But if there is another level of, let's say, who showed up to the webinar or who signed up for something after the webinar, then that's where you can send that data back into Google Ads with a value.
Yep. And again, maybe there's something like a HubSpot that has an ideal client profile or something like that. And you could pass the ICP data, say, yep, this person matched all the criteria based on the company, pass that back in, maybe get a little bit more information for that. But Menachem, thank you so much. Sure. We didn't get to every question. How can people find you to ask you any more questions or just connect?
Sure. I'm on Twitter, Menachem Ani, and you can always visit our website, jxtgroup.com.
And he's one of the real ones that knows what he's talking about. And if you want more of me, it's at Greg Finn. Feel free to ask any more questions. And I'm on Marketing Clock, the podcast, every Friday. And before you leave, please take a moment to tell us how we did in the Rate This Session tab on the right of your screen. The more ratings that you leave, the greater your chance of winning a $100 Amazon gift card or $100 to donate to the charity of your choice. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope you have an amazing rest of the show.
Hi, this is Pamela Parker, Research Director of the Content Studio at Third Door Media. And I'm here to remind you that the Search Engine Land Awards are now open for entries. So get your team recognized for the outstanding work they do in search marketing. Visit this link to enter today, and good luck. Thank you for watching. Click the agenda link at the top of your screen to choose your next session.